Proceed now to item 8, which is a notice of motion, and I've received a notice of motion moved by Councillor Walker and seconded by Councillor Watson. You have it on your agenda, members, and at this stage I will hand to Councillor Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. With your leave and the leave of the other members here, I'd like to suggest one small addition, and that follows on under C, and essentially it just states, note that limited work has been undertaken to date. And I'll just repeat that, note that limited work has been undertaken to date. And essentially that is just reflecting that, yes, there has been some work, but essentially it has been rather limited. So I'm happy to move the
Just before you do,
motion. Sure.
But the standing orders require me to ask if all the members agree to that addition. So firstly, maybe the question is there anybody who disagrees with the, it's not an amendment, it's an addition prior to the motion being moved. It has to be, according to the standing orders, agreed by all the members. So is there a voice that is not supportive of that addition?
Can I have a question, please, Mr. Chair? I'm just unsure when we say limited work has been undertaken to date. That's what I don't understand, because we spent a huge amount of work on the strategy and went out to public consultation. So to me, that's quite misleading. So can I have an explanation maybe from staff, because I believe that's an opinion.
So look, I can't allow any, I don't think I can allow any questions at this stage or any debate on this. I either have to...
Okay, so I don't agree with that addition then, because I don't have enough information to neither agree or disagree with that addition.
Okay, so can I just take it, are you a dissenting voice? And you're most welcome to, Councillor Cooper. Are you a dissenting voice to accepting this, these extra words?
Well, yes, because we've done a huge amount of work on this document. It hasn't been adopted yet, but
that's the problem
it
here.
Says, yeah, I don't agree with limited work. The words limited work has been undertaken.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Look, if it's helpful, perhaps you'd get everybody to agree if we just said some work has been taken. If Wayne's happy with that.
More than happy with that.
Yeah, then I think it takes the controversy out of it. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cooper, can I go back to you? Are you comfortable? Councillor Walker's in the room here, in the meeting room, nodding affirmatively that he would change it to noting some work has been undertaken to date.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that.
Just point of order, Mr. Chair. And
Councillor Watson.
I don't want to delay that, but just in terms of the standing orders, I mean, you're right. The mover of the notice may alter it with the consent of the meeting. It doesn't have to be the unanimous consent. It just has to be the consent. There's nothing about unanimity there. Just bring that up. Thank you.
Look, I don't think I need to check that. I think we need to work. I've always assumed that a consent was all the members agreed. But what, look, can we take advice on that, please? It's been agreed to and we'll proceed. Thank you. Councillor Walker, back to you. You are ready to move, and Councillor Watson to second your notice of motion with some minor word changes, which have been agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. So you've all got the notice of motion in front of you. I'll just make one comment first, and that's the reason why it came to this committee rather than the Environment Committee, and that is because of the utmost urgency. And I would just like to emphasise that it's the savings that we make now and the savings that we make on a daily basis that are going to impact on the days ahead in the summer. Waiting days, weeks, months really doesn't cut it. So you've got the various items on the notice of motion there. I'll just run through them briefly. So first of all, A focuses on a water conservation campaign that involves both Auckland Council and water care. So the concept is that this is an all of council response, and council needs to show leadership. And in respect of a campaign, the intent here is not simply around just communications. There are a whole array of things that council and water care can do. And in point of fact, many of those things played out in the 1993, 1994 water crisis that I was very involved with. So we've been there and done that. We know the sorts of things that are required. And if I just go through them briefly, the need to conserve water, that's self-evident. In fact, we know that the supply side is limited. So the most important thing that Aucklanders can do is to conserve. Obviously, there are a whole variety of measures to assist in conserving water, and there are a whole range of alternative water sources. And I'll just speak to that really briefly. Quite obviously, there's the water that water care is responsible for, and that's the drinking water and the wastewater. But then we've got bore water, spring water, stream water, storm water, roof water, grey water, sea water. There's a whole lot of other waters that all have potential, some of them significant, that go beyond water care, and that goes to the response on the part of council in terms of a campaign. And then across council, aside from water care, you've got Healthy Waters, who obviously deal with stormwater and they deal with streams. You've got consents who deal with bore water and the like. And you've got planning. There are many parts of council that need to be involved in successfully meeting this crisis. Part B mentions that there are a number of businesses affected. And the reason that I'm raising this now, and the reason why you've got the email that's been circulated by an association of a number of businesses affected, is those businesses are having severe problems right now because the perception is that you shouldn't be doing any water blasting, you shouldn't be cleaning homes and the like, when in point of fact, it is possible to do those things using very minimal amounts of water, and preferably water that's not the reticulated drinking water. But it is really important to get that message across, otherwise a number of these businesses who are already severely affected by COVID will go to the wall. So there's a message that needs to go out quickly. Part C mentions that we deal with a water climate resilient strategy for Auckland, and we know that we clocked in quite a bit of effort to our discussion document around this, but at this point it's simply a discussion document, and that needs to be lifted so that's a strategy. And that would be similar to water strategies that many Australian cities have, for example, the City of Melbourne. And the importance of that is that strategy is then able to direct all parts of council, particularly water care, because all of the council-controlled organisations have to comply with council strategies, plans and documents effectively. Then D, that Water Care Services Limited and Auckland Council report back to the governing body on or before the 25th of June. I'd like to see that prior to the 25th of June, and that goes to an update, measures taken and next steps and timeframes. And if I can just speak briefly to that, not only are we obviously reporting to council, but that is an important mechanism to communicate to the public at large, and that is absolutely crucial. I would suggest that this campaign needs to be collaborative, and that involves businesses and the public. It needs to be dynamic and adaptive because it's going to change and we can't forecast what that circumstance is. It has to be broad. It follows that it should be scenario-based because, again, we have uncertainty. We need to have targets so that we can get people involved in meeting goals based around targets for all of Auckland, and quite obviously it needs to be resilient. And I would suggest if it is collaborative and it's transparent, then there is a maximum of opportunity for the public to get involved in saving their water. And I would like to emphasise that because it is Aucklanders that are using the water, and they are the ones that are going to determine whether we have a successful campaign or not. Just further, I have got some supporting notes. You can read those. One of the things that those notes emphasise is the uncertainty, particularly as it goes to weather and climate change. And I would draw your attention to the excellent article in this morning's Herald by Jim Salinger, who is pointing out that there are changes in the weather that are due to climate change. That is his view, and I agree with that. So we could be in for a long run here. So this may not be just a crisis that we're dealing with this year, it may be an ongoing situation, and I know that the Chair, Councillor Darby, is onto that in terms of a strategy that deals with the planning issues. So really that's all I want to speak to, Mr Chair. Other councillors are welcome to make some comments. I would hope that everybody is in support of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson is the seconder. Would you like to speak now? Or invite Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chair, and I would thank Councillor Walker for bringing this notice of motion to us at this time, and for you accepting it as the Chair. It's incredibly timely. I'm sure one of the main themes of the CCO review will be, from the CCOs coming back to us, is the desirability of direction, and that goes to not just CCOs but within the council itself. So as much as there's been commentary on the CCOs, one of the concerns they've got is that at times they seem to lack a degree of direction, and I think this is an attempt to do that, and it's very welcome. Now more so than ever, we have a combination of climate change, COVID-19, and this water crisis all coming together. So, we're in a bit of an eye of a storm here, and I think it really requires us as a governing body to step up and provide some direction to the organisation as a whole. I just want to pick up, Mr Chair, very briefly on two elements of the notice of motion. The first one to do with the need to conserve water. That and other measures are things that can be done at virtually no cost to the council, but I think they can be done far more vigorously and far more effectively if we have some more strategic approach to conservation. As much as Auckland stacks up, reasonably well within New Zealand and internationally, it's clear that a lot more can be done. And you only have to look at some of the statistics that Watercare have got in terms of residential usage, which makes up about 54% of the use of the reticulated supply within the household. So we're concentrating on outside the household at the moment, which is a rather paltry 12%, and it'll be even less now in terms of winter usage. But if we go to the shower, 27%, the toilet, 18%, taps, 14%, those things collectively come up to about 82% of residential use. A lot more can be done. I remember back in the 90s, my dad installed his own tank, plumbed it into the toilet to use the water off the roof for flushing the toilet. Admittedly, he was a Scotsman, so that everything stacked up economically, I can assure you of that. Straight away, there was a 20% saving in domestic water use. That was a small, inexpensive tank, and if you look at the range of products now, there's a number of them around that, 1,000, 3,000 litres that are anywhere from about $800 to $1,200. We can do a lot more to encourage people in that respect. When it comes to water conservation, we already have segments of our society in Auckland who can lead the way. The people on tanks, they had an early rerun of this, or a run of this, of what was coming in January and February. The people, the ward councillors that have a high degree of tank users in their community know all about that. Those people are incredibly conservationist minded, could teach us all a thing or two. Other than this crisis, I have neighbours who are entirely, this is in an urban environment, entirely dependent on their tank supply, so they never fill up. They might have had to fill up once this time, but generally entirely self-reliant. Myself, I'm one of the relevant multi-millionaires of Whangapaora, and that I have a tap at the outside and the tank. So the last couple of days' rain, by my calculation, that is 3 or 4 weeks water supply for my household, and they are heavy users. Other than me, continuing the proud Scottish tradition, the rest of them are pretty lavish in their water usage. So there's a real opportunity for us, Mr. Chair, to make pretty substantial savings over and above what we're already doing with a more targeted education program, and I think this is what this notice of motion alludes to. The other area I just wanted to comment on very quickly was to do with the businesses, the noting part of this notice of motion that goes to businesses on water restrictions. We have a case now where we are making an effort to supply non-potable water via tankers, but if we look at other countries, for instance, if we're talking about perception, public perception of water use, which we are talking about, that's what Watercare says, in Queensland, they dealt to that issue not with restrictions on small businesses, but with education of public perception and business use of water. So they dealt to that problem quite a different way than us, that did not put businesses to the wall, that did not affect employment. Now, so we need to do that, because as much as efforts have been made, they are not working with businesses. So I'm hearing from businesses where the practicalities of delivery and use of the 3,000 litres just isn't working. So that is something that can come up through this process, Mr. Chair. I've read the discussion document, and I think it's important we realise it's not a strategy, it's a discussion document, and it has a lot of good stuff there. A lot of, well, for me, it wouldn't take too much to transform that into a strategy. As it stands, the documentation we've already got. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we do need to put a number of the key features of that discussion document into action quickly, not the usual kind of laborious process that drags out over years. We need to start doing a number of that stuff now. They identify all the key issues in that discussion document. They point the way forward in terms of conservation and in terms of council's involvement. So I think when we get to the essence of this notice of motion, Mr. Chair, it is to provide some direction to what we have already identified in that February 2019 discussion document. But in this new world, and I think you have been prominent, Mr. Chair, as much as anyone in promoting this, we need to act. We need to do things, and we need to do them in a timely manner. And this is what this notice of motion seeks endorsement from the committee members. So I hope that is a unanimous support for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Good words. Mayor Goff?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Councillor Walker for bringing the motion before us. And I want to say right up front that I support the motion. I want to acknowledge the work that has been done, because some real work has been done. All of us, I think, here in the room and online attended the briefing by Watercare on Tuesday, and it was good to hear that some of our top 20 water users have reduced, the industrial users that is, have reduced their usage by 20%. And this morning's figure, the demand yesterday was 406 million litres a day, so that's within the new target of 410. And our lake levels have gone up a couple of percent, 44.91%, with the rain in the last 8 or 9 days. Now, in saying those things, I don't want to induce any complacency. I think we face the most serious situation in terms of water shortage, certainly since 1993, but possibly even more serious than that. We've had the lowest rainfall in the history of the city, and the rain that's promised doesn't seem to eventuate. And while rainfall would solve our problem, we can't rely on that to be a self-solving problem. We need to do more than we're doing, and that means we need to do more in restricting demand, and we need to do more in increasing supply. Basically, it comes within 2 different categories, and I think the notice of motion refers to both. We need short-term immediate action, because in 6 months' time we could be facing the worst water shortage this city has ever faced. So what we're doing is good. The Watercare has told all of us that they've increasing the daily supply by up to 50 million litres a day from the Waikato, from Pukekohe Bore, from Hay Creek Dam, and from using non-potable sources for construction. All of that's good, but it may not be sufficient if we don't get the rain to prevent an emergency, a crisis occurring by summer. So clearly the message is to Watercare, we need to do more. To date, Watercare has largely handled this issue as an operational matter. I think it's time now, because of the risk of the scale of the crisis, should it eventuate, to elevate that to a strategic level. And I've asked Council and I've asked Watercare to have senior officials from both sides to come together to work on both immediate actions that can be taken over and above what we're doing, and also to deal with the medium-term requirements. And I think that group, and we absolutely need the collaboration between Council and Watercare to the maximum extent, but I also think they need to report regularly to us, and I think they need to have oversight by a political reference group. And that's what I will in due course be proposing to everybody here. I'm intending over the next week to meet with the Waikato Regional Council. One of our medium-term solutions was 200 million litres a day from the Waikato. We need to spend 300 to 350 million to treat that and to pump it up to Auckland. That's a hell of a lot of money, and for a lot of the time it'll be redundant, but surely it's a better solution than having a crisis where Auckland runs out of water. Now, our problem is that for 7 years that has waited on the waiting list for resource consent, and we're still only 89th. And I think that points to possibly a shortage of resources on the part of the Waikato Regional Council. And I think we need to work together with the Regional Council to go to government to say, look, we've got to change the system and we've got to change the resourcing, because you can't wait for 7 years for, because we can't start building a plant until we've got consent to use the water. So we do need that consent, and we do need to work with Waikato Tainui to deal with any issues that they may have. They are an essential partner in this. Hamilton Council has kindly given agreement in principle to allow us to use 50 million litres a day of their consent that they're not using. But we're waiting till the end of the month for the council to meet. So I want to meet with Hamilton Council, I want to meet with the Waikato Regional Council, I want to meet with Waikato Tainui, and I'll be doing all of those things within the next week. Tank water, Councillor Watson spoke eloquently about that. I've relied on tank water for 30 years, and Councillor Cashmore for considerably longer. I won't say because it's been forever. And Councillor Walker. And that teaches all of us two things. One, it teaches us to conserve water, but it also teaches us we have to have the supply. So I've got 80,000 litres storage of water at home, and in the middle of the worst ever drought, those tanks were still a third full. And the first rain on the roof from the barn and the house damn near filled those tanks again. So we need to look at the roof water. We need to be more serious about that, removing disincentives, providing incentives. As well as the Waikato, and we can't rely on the consent being given, even when it's heard, we have to look at the other options. Desalination is one, I suspect too expensive, but we need to look at the option. And the other is recycling wastewater, which is the ultimate in the circular economy, which all of us in our green moments talk about. So those are the things that we need to do in the medium term. But right now, I want our top people on council, our top people on Watercare, oversight by this body or by councillors and reporting regularly, probably to the governing body, to do everything we can between now and December to head off the crisis that will occur if it doesn't rain enough. We can pray for rain, we can hope for rain, it's not good enough. We need to use every mechanism available to us to provide that guarantee. And thank you for your indulgence for going 59 seconds over, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And for those that aren't in the room, I do note that Mayor Goff is not wearing a tie. Now, that is one of the first times at a formal meeting of the council I've seen the Mayor very relaxed. It's a post-COVID look. And that goes for the Deputy Mayor and myself as well. And quite a few others. So we'll go to the next speaker, and that is the Deputy Mayor without a tie. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr Chair. And I'd like to acknowledge Councillors Walker and Watson for this notice of motion. Councillor Philip Heiner and I were going to put forward an amendment which was actually talking exactly about what the red letters up there say, that there is work that has been underway for a number of years. But what this notice of motion does is says we need to put the pedal to the metal and extend it and make it move faster and quicker. We need to be the masters of our own destiny with water. Short-term solutions might give us a few more thousand litres a day, potentially 50. And then we've got a medium-term solution of the 200,000 litres once the facilities are built, which is probably a 2 or 3 year build. 200 million, sorry, yeah. In the meantime, though, we must look at what the households are doing, and Councillors Watson and Walker and the Mayor both emphasise that, so I will not repeat it, because there are solutions there. But none of them give the level of resilience that is going to be required for this city. Under a more condensed living model, water tanks become harder and harder. So we need to find another source of water. I would suggest to you that dams are probably too hard, and the RMA now, there's not many places left, even if there are any. We need to look at desalination or repurposing of wastewater. And we can't wait for what is in the water care plan, asset management plan, about that. We need to move that forward faster, and we need to work with Water Care Collaborative. Councillor Walker, I commend you for saying let's work together to find a solution. Let's work together so that we do become the masters of our own destiny, to build that resilience that's absolutely critical for this life-providing resource that we must have right. All of this will come at a bit of a price, and we have to ensure that that price is recovered via water care and the volumetric charging system. You borrow assets and it's paid back over the usage of the water. That is a fair and sane and sensible way to do this work. Again, Mr Chair, thank you for the indulgence. I'm happy that Alf and I were able to pull that amendment, and what we were suggesting has actually been incorporated in a short sentence in C, and it's appreciated. And I really look forward, Mr Mayor, to working with Water Care and working with the Waikato, who we have quite a good relationship with now, to move this forward in a manner that actually can deliver results, not only just for Auckland, but also for the Waikato and for Tainui. So thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And call upon Councillor Coombe, please.
Kia ora, Mr Chair. Thank you, Councillors Walker and Watson, for bringing this notice of motion. I think you've given us a useful valve for being able to have a discussion on this. And obviously, it sounds like there's a lot of, we all feel very supportive of, particularly around a climate resilient strategy. And I just had some very brief things I just wanted to note and acknowledge, was that the local boards have been doing a lot of thinking about this. And I mean, it's unfortunate that it's taken us a drought to really focus our minds on the fact that we've had a water strategy that seems to just be dependent on praying for rain each year, where obviously we need to bring together all the various strategies, all the various options that we have for in terms of a climate resilient strategy. And the FO, I just want to acknowledge the FO local board. Jessica Rose has brought a notice of motion, and Alexandra Bonham for the Waitemata local board, and they have also asked that we progress the climate resilient water strategy. So there's lots of parts of council thinking about this, and I think it's good for the governing body to bring a focus to it as well, and then acknowledging that this work is underway, and it does sit under the Environment and Climate Change Committee, that we do have that in our work program to have a water strategy. So I think this has put a bit more urgency into this work, and I hope we can progress it faster. And I do commend everybody to listen to Andrew Chen, did a very good interview with Jim Mora on Saturday morning, and I must say I learnt more from listening to that interview, very short interview, very good, about the barriers to putting in rain tanks that we have on council and the lack of incentives to actually have water resilience. And Andrew made some very good points about it's not just necessarily a way of ensuring that we're resilient in a drought. This is in terms of being able to, where we have natural disasters, there's a whole range of reasons why we might want to have water stored on our property. So Thank you, Andrew, for that interview. And thank you to the local boards who are also pushing us along to develop the strategy. Kia ora.
Good, Councillor Coombe, thank you. I just want to make draw one thing to members' attention. Under D, Councillor Walker, would you be okay? I think this is pretty procedural. The date has been changed. It is now in
Yes.
our diaries for the workshop. This is the workshop that came out of the meeting where we imposed the water restrictions. That workshop is on the 1st of July. It's all good?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, because it's a change, I just need to check with all the other members as well. Does the meeting consent to that change? I think it's an obvious one. Thank you. We'll proceed. And Member Tauhenare, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions I have, and listening to His Worship the Mayor, that he will endeavour to meet with Waikato Tainui this coming week. That's good news. My question really was what consultation with Waikato Tainui has there been? There's been a lot of press coverage of taking extra water from the Waikato, and I was wondering, and not a question of you, Your Worship, but of our officials, what consultation has happened, or what consultation will happen over the taking of extra water? Kia ora.
Kia ora tau. Can I just, I'll just find out where that question's best answered. I might go to the Director of Strategy in the first instance and then to the Mayor. Thank you, Tau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, I don't know enough details, so perhaps if I could pass to the Mayor, who I think does have some more details on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Member Hinare. The Watercare Board, I think it was, met recently with Ruku Moana Schaafhausen, and I've been in contact with the Minister of Internal Affairs, who's obviously Waikato Tainui, and will be seeking a meeting with Ruku Moana at an early date, and whoever she may wish to have at that meeting. We are fortunate that on the board of Watercare we have Hinarangi Raumati, who is Ngāti Mutanga and was the Chief Financial Officer for Tainui Group Holdings. So the Watercare itself says that on their board they are getting an input from Māoridom, but I think having a meeting face-to-face with Waikato Tainui is important. I've also been in discussion, Tau, you might not have been brought up, it was just a recent discussion with David Taipari, and I've asked him to be part of the group that go down and talk to Waikato Tainui, so that we can work through, the sense I get is that they would like to help with the immediate and urgent situation. They have some issues about the longer term proposal for 200 million litres a day, and I think it's important that at an early point we start to have those discussions and work out, for example, how we, through Watercare, can collaborate on big issues facing Waikato Tainui, like trying to improve the quality of the water in the Waikato that over the last century has been pretty degraded. So if they're part of the solution for us, we can help with the solution for people in the Waikato in terms of making sure that we can improve the quality of that river.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Kia ora tau. Councillor Al Filipina, please.
Thank you, Chair. And look, I just wanted to sort of make a few comments around the recommendation. Sorry, the notice of motion, which obviously I support. But I want to point out that hopefully everybody's read the our water future, because in there it covered everything that I'm seeing in this notice of motion. I also note reading that document that went out from the 17th of February to the 19th of April that there was consultation. I also know why the strategy itself, or the work being done with our water future, why it ended up stopping, and that's because it somehow ended up going from Andrew Chen's department to strategy, and we then ended up just basically getting nothing done. In regards to working with Watercare, I also know during the consultation and the forming of that particular document, I also know that Watercare and former Councillor Penny Hulse, they ended up having oversight in regards to the governance, because it was important to work with Watercare and all our stakeholders. So, Chair, you know, it's you know, this notice of motion, it's good on it, but I would have loved to have more stronger comments made in the noting some work, because there's been a heck of a lot of work being done. I obviously, when I read the notice of motion, was surprised that it was accepted, Chair, because a lot of the stuff that has been mentioned in there, as I said previously, is being done anyway. But Chair, I just want to say thank you around the 1st of July 2020 with that workshop, because we were all advised of that particular date in July. So I look forward to working still with Watercare and still with our stakeholders around this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Alfalapana. And call upon Councillor Richard Hills, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Walker and Watson for bringing this forward. Clearly, everything in it I support, and it's good to have a renewed focus on everything that's said there. I will just say, and backing up a little bit of what Councillor Philippine has said, we, you know, Watercare or others may get a little surprised at some of the comments because of what we've already supported as a council. We obviously, Watercare was the first CCO to have a climate change strategy, announced in January 2019, and that came to us with that. They also had their water efficiency strategy in 2017 that came to us as well, on top of our water future document that went to all local boards. Everyone fed back, we fed back on that, and it was supposed to come back to the Environment and Climate Change Committee. Pippa and I worked hard it wasn't originally on our work program. We got it on our first meeting in March. We approved that work program with the water strategy in there to be done this year, and also it was in our terms of reference, water and the water strategy. We obviously couldn't bring it to that meeting as we were approving the work plan in March, and the climate change the climate action plan took up most of that meeting, and then obviously we had COVID and we have not been able to have another meeting. So I'm glad that this is being discussed now at Planning Committee, as we don't have another committee until next month. So we'll really implore the staff and others to really build on our Water Future document that we've already had. But you know, we must acknowledge Watercare also having a head of sustainability for about 18 months now, and I met with Chris I think in February on their plans and their work, and also the campaign that Council and Watercare have already been working on. So yes, we can increase the visibility of that campaign, and I agree with what Councillor Walker is saying here, but you know, we also had a survey done in April, a council survey that said 97% of all Aucklanders know there's a water shortage and they all need to save water now. And then about 65% then listed a number of things such as having shorter showers, having, not washing your car and things like that they were aware of. So that was a month and a half ago. So with 97% of Aucklanders saying they're aware of a water shortage and that they need to save water due to the work done by the Mayor and others, but also Watercare, and you know, there's billboards and bus stop signs and things that have been up since February and March in our area, as well as the pamphlets in every water care bill that the drought was coming. But also consider that this is about climate change. We're being told that this is a one-off, 1 in 100 year, maybe 1 in 200 year drought. And yes, looking at the patterns of the last couple of years, this time last year we were 70% full almost of the dams. I mean, even at Christmas time this year, we were almost, I think we're at 90%. That was only 6 months ago, we're at 90%. So we couldn't probably have foretold, looking at the last 3, 4, 5 years, that we would be in this dire situation now. But we need to act drastically on climate change and also plan for the future, because this is going to continue to happen. In January and February, we only received 10% of the normal rain that we receive in January and February. That is maybe a one-off this year, but these one-offs will continue to become a pattern, no doubt. And we aren't getting the heavy rain we usually expect. And it is pretty scary for all Aucklanders, but also for the businesses and others that Councillor Walker and Watson mentioned, that their livelihoods rely on water, but all of us rely on water. On the water tanks, and I'm glad, Mr. Chair, that you're coming with a plan change to help deal with that. It is extremely confusing for people to try and put water tanks in, water storage, grey water recycling. I've been looking at, and the Ministry of Health is opposed to that, and it's extremely expensive for the user to plumb it into their house. It needs to be emptied daily. It won't actually make a huge difference in a drought situation like this. On new builds, we're doing some great work there, but we don't have it on every new build. When you subdivide or put a unit on, there's detention tanks, but not retention tanks. So the Building Act and others, require it for stormwater issues, but many people aren't able to use that water. It has to slowly leak. So that is confusing for people. But I must acknowledge Aucklanders do a lot better than Wellington, about 100 litres a day per person less than Wellington. Sydney and Melbourne, we beat Sydney by quite a mile. Melbourne is about the same as us. So we're doing great, but we need to plan as a city far faster. And happy to take up that and involve Councillor Walker and Watson as much as we can in the whole council and Independent Multi-Statutory Board and local boards and CCOs, because this is a climate change issue, a water issue. But we can't just focus on it at emergency times like this when there's a drought. We have to be focused on this all the time. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. And now call Councillor Shane Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's nice to speak in favour of this motion, actually. It feels good. And I want to thank the councillors for bringing it. I think I need to make a couple of points here, that Auckland residents actually do very well as it is. They do great at managing their own demand. And I want to thank everyone for doing that, and especially compared to other parts of the country. To me, this is a supply issue. It's not just so much of a demand issue, it's actually a supply issue. I want to thank Councillor Watson for bringing up the tank issue. There are plenty of tanks in my ward in Waitakere, and I want to acknowledge Waitakere City Council that we're leaders in that area. They were starting to open that conversation about things like repurposing of wastewater as well during that council. And I want to acknowledge Penny Hulse for her leadership on this issue. I agree with Councillor Hills that this is a climate change issue. We've heard different stories around this, but we've had droughts and unexpected dry spells for the last 3 years, and climate change modelling is at least clear that weather will be more intense and less predictable, and therefore it's important to build resilience into our city's network so that we can guarantee supply for future generations. We're certainly not the only city in the world discussing this, and all the time we're hearing about various large cities across the world that are struggling with their water, places like Cape Town, and I see Chennai in India was the latest. 2.3 billion people in the world live in areas of water scarcity across the entire world, and that situation is getting worse and worse with climate change. So through this kind of work, I want us to lead on this council to say that we can guarantee the supply in the future for Auckland residents, and we can lead on this issue. And I just want to wrap up by saying that point C in particular is a very important one for me, and I thank the mover and seconder for raising it. Look, hoping for rain is not a plan. We need a plan for resilience and for that to be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shane Henderson, and now call upon Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm really pleased we've got this notice of motion because it really does highlight what council and water care are doing together. But also, I think I want to acknowledge the Mayor for putting together or implementing councillor liaison roles, because I think, and there's several of us around the table that have those, and I think that's also allowed, I suppose, a bigger lens into our CCOs. We have the CCO review going on and the oversight committee, and I think that that actually opens up the way for us to work together better. And this really, this drought and this crisis has highlighted that need greatly. And for the skeptics out there that we see in social media world that say we're doing nothing, this really highlights the things we are doing together and the things we need to do together and we intend to do together. And so for me, that's really important to let our public see that. I just also want to acknowledge and talk about Councillor Coombe talked about Andrew Chen's interview on Radio New Zealand on Sunday morning with Jim Mora, and you can get that online. It is an excellent spelling out of what is being done, but also what we need to do. And what I've seen really in this is it's about there's a responsibility, a joint responsibility across our council family and our planning department, regulation, our environment strategy, and also government changes that are needed. And I think this kind of action working together will strengthen our relationships as a family, because there is criticism that we're not doing enough together and side by side, hand in hand. And I think that will give the public more confidence. In terms of tanks, I just wanted to talk about that. I mean, I've had one since I had my 1994 drought baby, and she's coming up 26, and we've had a rather large tank hooked up to our washing machine and our outside water for many, many years. And though that's really good to have, and we want to encourage our rural tank, people who rely on tanks to actually look at putting another tank in, just looking at how much water care we're delivering a megalitre, that's 100 million litres a day to our tank people who had tanks. And so tanks aren't always the answer, because in the end, a lot of those people with tanks had to rely on the metropolitan water supply. And so we do have to look for other ways of doing it. Even a tank needs to rely on town water, as we can colloquially call it. And there was 44.5 million litres given out to tank users earlier in the year through water care at the cost of $1.4 million. So I think that's an important thing as well. We've got to look everywhere to be able to increase our source. And even our water savings will only put off the time when water runs out if we don't find water. So I really acknowledge Aucklanders for being great savers of water, but there's the other side to that. We need to look at the supply. So I support this because it really spells out what we need to do together right across our council family. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Good points all. So members, briefly, I also support this notice of motion coming from Councillors Walker and Watson. In some ways, yes, it does reinforce some of the things that we've been discussing, but it goes further than that. It actually creates an even greater urgency. I don't think there's anyone around this table that does not consider it an urgent matter that we address this matter, but it just points us very firmly in a direction. So we've got to address some short-term issues, and then we've got to strategically plot a course for the long-term future. And that future has got to be different to the one that has been mapped to date. And I think both councillors are reiterating those points. So they're giving urgency. And I think the other thing that the councillors are saying, that hopefully we will all back up here in our vote of support, is that they're saying that the buck stops here at this table. This is where it stops. And it can't be just pointing over to Watercare. It is our responsibility. And we will work with Watercare. We will work with our strategy unit. We will work with our planning unit. We will work with our Healthy Waters unit, all together to resolve this in the short term and the long term. But I can't help but think that we maybe have not exercised the accountability measures that are at our disposal. And so I think we need to, I acknowledge that, and that we do need to have this stronger oversight, which this motion is emphasising. Having said that, when we confirmed the water restrictions, we also confirmed a joint workshop, the beginning of a much stronger collaboration. Rather than the council making a decision in isolation of Watercare and vice versa, that we actually come together and we canvass these issues together, face to face, and arrive at decisions that will endure and serve the city well going forward. There's been some discussion about rainwater tanks. It was just in the early stages of COVID when I had a discussion with Andrew Chen, who heads up our Healthy Waters team, and discovered that a rainwater tank to be located in a side yard requires a resource consent that could be more costly than the tank itself. Clearly, there's work to do. And so there will be a plan change report coming to the Planning Committee following a workshop of us all to consider moving that from the costly discretionary category to making it a permitted activity where somebody does not have to expend $2,000 to $5,000 getting a consent for a tank that costs $1,000. So it's simple things like that. In the Retrofit Your Home program, there is assistance, there's financial assistance provided specifically for rainwater tank installations. And I don't think enough people know about that. We need to talk about that. And that will be confirmed in our emergency budget, one of the pluses of the emergency budget. And this afternoon, the chairs of the Planning Committee and the Environment and Community Committee are meeting with staff to discuss the development of the water strategy. So a lot is in train, but the councillors who have put this motion before us today are emphasising at an even higher level, and I thank them for it. There is much talk about how efficient we are in our water consumption, but I think we need to look at the cities that are challenging us to be the most livable cities in the world, not other New Zealand cities. And those cities are cities like Copenhagen, which had 2 years ago put in place a target of per capita water consumption of 100 litres. They reached it last year and they've reset that target now. For 2025, I think it's 90 litres per capita compared with our 160. Vienna is another city that pops up as one of the cities challenging us to be the most livable. It has a per capita water consumption of 130, and it's also achieved that along with Copenhagen by very strong demand management programs and incentives. They do have costly water, but it's their demand management program that has got there. On that, we have Watercare's water efficiency strategy, which Councillor Hills referred to. Let's have a look at that and see where they're up to on that, because one of the things that I noticed on that strategy was a requirement for all developers to smart meter new developments. Now, I know that's not happening because I've just checked in with Watercare, and for any vertical development, multi-unit development, there is usually only 1 metre at the development. No, only 1 metre. Vienna achieved their targets by metering every user. Now, there might be a cost to that, but let's look at the costs and the benefits. So that demand management program, I would like us to give a lot more consideration to thinking about demand and not just about the big capital supply solutions. Unless we get things in balance here, we will be spending inordinate amounts on big ticket solutions. And Member Henry highlights the value of the Waikato River. It is not, and I'm maybe paraphrasing you here, Councillor Tohenere, but it is not just water to be taken. It is of cultural value as well, and I think we need to recognise that. So let's take this opportunity of supporting this motion and reset and redirect and give this the real focus and attention that this council must give this issue, and I will be supporting all parts of the motion, and I thank the mover and the seconder. Now, Councillor Walker, you do have a right of reply.
I'll just make a few incredibly brief comments, Mr. Chair, and very encouraged by the support around the table that's here and the wider table of those that are online. So quite obviously we've got urgency. I think everybody's reflected that, especially yourself, and that's marvellous. There's been a strong emphasis on action, which goes to that, and obviously we need action now. There's been mention made of the local boards, and I did acknowledge them in my supporting information. There are a number of local boards that are taking action on this. Of course, more than anything, the real key word is around collaboration, and that's collaboration across all of council, but collaboration in the wider sense with all of Auckland, because it's the decisions that individual Aucklanders and households make that will save us, both immediately and into the long term. So that's the public aspect of a strategy. Quite obviously, you've mentioned that we need to have strategic oversight. Agree with that completely. That's implicit in this. And yes, smart meters, and I think what I'd say to that is you've got meters that you can install, smart meters that give you real-time information in a household. You can even pinpoint from the smart meter what the signature is of the appliance that is using the water. So that sort of technology is available now. We should have that in our homes, because then the business, the householder, they're in control, and that's really where it's at. So look, thank you everyone for the support, and I look forward to some action on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Thank you, Councillor Watson. I will put the motions before us. That's A, B, C and D that the members are voting on. I would be happy to take this on a vote of voices, and I will do so. So members, can you please cast your vote now? All those in favour say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
And to the contrary, say no. Thank you. I didn't hear any contrary voices, so Councillor Walker, would you like this to be noted a unanimous vote of support?
Yes, please.
Thank you, and we will note accordingly. Thank you, members.